Charles Jacobs has, over 4 decades, founded, co-founded, and led several Jewish and human rights organizations that addressed unmet needs